Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for more true crime story. To the outside world, the Winkler family lived the American dream. Matthew Winkler was a young, charismatic pastor with a boyish smile, a gift for preaching, and a spotless reputation. At just 31, he'd become the spiritual leader of the 4th Street Church of Christ in the quiet town of Selmer, Tennessee. The congregation adored him. His sermons were heartfelt, filled with biblical wisdom and warmth. Parishioners would often say that he was wise beyond his years and a man after God's own heart. He was the kind of pastor people trusted with their secrets and their souls. At his side was Mary Winkler, his wife of nearly a decade. Soft-spoken and slender, Mary embodied the image of a dutiful pastor's wife. Polite, well-mannered, and always present at church functions with their 3 daughters in tow. She often stood just behind Matthew, smiling in support while he led the flock. Their home, nestled in a modest neighborhood just blocks from the church, seemed like the perfect haven. Tidy lawn, toys scattered in the backyard, and children's drawings proudly taped to the refrigerator. But behind the polished image, something darker was festering. A town that doesn't see trouble coming. Selmer wasn't the type of town where crime headlines made the front page. It was a community rooted in faith and family, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors at night. In towns like this, you didn't just know your neighbors, you prayed with them on Sunday morning and passed them the sweet tea at potluck dinners. That's why, when something finally shattered the Winklers' picture-perfect facade, the town didn't just grieve, it reeled in disbelief. Rumors would soon circulate. Whispers in the pews, murmurs at the diner. Had something been going on behind closed doors? But in the weeks leading up to the event that would rock the congregation and the country, there were warning signs. Tiny red flags hidden beneath daily routine. Matthew had recently preached a sermon on obedience and submission that struck some as unusually intense. Mary, normally composed and calm, had seemed withdrawn. A neighbor recalled seeing her stare out of her kitchen window for several minutes, unmoving. Another said she was seen quietly crying in her minivan before church one Sunday, brushing it off as exhaustion. But no one dug deeper. After all, they were the Winklers, the golden couple of Selmer. Behind closed doors, those closest to Mary would later reveal subtle cracks in the marriage. She confided once to a friend that Matthew had become increasingly strict at home, controlling how she dressed, how she disciplined the children, even how she spent money. He didn't tolerate disrespect, she allegedly said. But Mary never elaborated, and no one dared to challenge a man as respected as Pastor Winkler. Matthew, on the other hand, never showed signs of stress in public. He appeared composed, focused, and kind. But some church members noted he had grown more irritable during meetings and even seemed to be watching Mary more closely than usual. Still, it was hard to question a man whose entire identity was built around integrity and faith. Until the morning of March 22, 2006, when Matthew didn't show up for Wednesday night services. The pastor is missing. At first, no one panicked. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe the girls were sick. But by 9 p.m., when no one could reach him or Mary, and with the church dark and empty, concern turned into urgency. A deacon drove to the Winklers' home. The lights were off. No sounds inside. He knocked, then pounded. Nothing. Local police were called. Inside the home, the scene was quiet. Too quiet. In the master bedroom, they found Pastor Matthew Winkler lying on the floor, dead from a single shotgun wound to the back. There was no sign of forced entry. No ransacked drawers, no missing valuables. But what was missing was more alarming. Mary Winkler and their 3 young daughters. They had vanished. Was this a robbery gone wrong? A kidnapping? Or something even more twisted? By sunrise on March 23, 2006, the sleepy town of Selmer, Tennessee, had turned into the center of a chilling mystery. Police tapes surrounded the Winkler home. Local news vans idled nearby, and neighbors stood in clumps on the sidewalk, whispering, praying, stunned. Everyone wanted to know, who would kill Pastor Winkler? And where was Mary? The answer would come, but it wouldn't be what anyone expected. The search begins. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation TBI, immediately classified the case as a homicide and the disappearance of Mary and the children as a possible abduction. Amber alerts were issued. Flyers went out across the state. Highway Patrol was notified. Mary's SUV was entered into the National Crime Database. While the nation grieved a slain pastor, detectives feared his wife and daughters were now in danger, possibly running for their lives. The church held a vigil that evening. Congregants cried and sang hymns under candlelight. They prayed for protection, for answers, for justice. What they didn't know was that Mary Winkler wasn't in danger. She was running, but not from a killer. A quiet arrest in Orange Beach. The very next day, more than 300 miles away, a sharp-eyed police officer spotted a beige Nissan Maxima parked outside an economy motel in Orange Beach, Alabama. Inside the car, 3 little girls, safe, sitting calmly as if on a family vacation. Inside the motel room, Mary Winkler, alone, quiet, cooperative. When authorities approached, she didn't resist. She didn't ask why. Instead, she simply said, "I'm the one you're looking for." They read her the Miranda rights. She nodded. No one expected what came next. A confession that shook the nation. Under questioning, Mary confessed. She had shot her husband in the back while he slept. Why? The story she told wasn't one of hate, or revenge, or jealousy. It was about control, about humiliation, about years of being silenced. She told investigators that Matthew had become increasingly verbally and emotionally abusive, that he dominated her every move, screamed at her in front of the children, and pushed her to obey in all things. According to Mary, he had even forced her to wear certain clothes, to keep her hair styled a particular way, and to remain submissive at all times. But the part that truly stunned investigators? Mary claimed that Matthew had pressured her into participating in disturbing bedroom practices that she said went against her morals. She described a deep sense of shame, of powerlessness, and fear not just for herself but for her daughters. She said that the night before the murder, they had argued about their finances. She had discovered that Matthew had taken out loans and left them in her name, without her knowledge. That, she said, was the final breaking point. The next morning, she picked up the family's 12-gauge shotgun and pulled the trigger. A town in denial. Back in Selmer, the news spread like wildfire. Mary Winkler had confessed to killing her husband. The community was divided. Some couldn't believe it. Mary? They asked. The quiet, polite church mom? Others nodded solemnly. They had seen the signs they didn't fully understand at the time. Mary's sadness, her silence, the way she never looked Matthew in the eye during church luncheons. But still, murder? Church members remembered Matthew as kind, devoted, and godly. No one could reconcile the man in Mary's confession with the man who stood at the pulpit each Sunday. As one member put it, if there was trouble in that home, it was buried so deep not even prayer could dig it out. Public sympathy or public outrage? Mary's arrest set off a national debate. Was she an abused wife who snapped, or a cold-blooded killer covering her tracks? The media coverage was relentless. Some outlets painted her as a battered woman pushed to the edge. Others labeled her a manipulative murderer trying to rewrite the narrative. The truth, as always, seemed to lie somewhere in between. Mary showed no signs of mental instability. She didn't flee in panic. She took her daughters on a road trip. She didn't try to hide the body. She left it in bed, packed up the girls, and drove to Alabama. But when asked if she regretted it, her eyes filled with tears. She said, "I loved him. I just wanted the yelling to stop. I didn't want him dead. I just wanted peace." Was it the statement of a traumatized woman, or the performance of someone who had carefully planned it all? The public wanted answers, and so did the court. Mary Winkler's confession stunned the community, but it was what investigators found afterward that peeled back the final layers of a dark and complicated life. Inside the crime scene, in the bedroom where Pastor Matthew Winkler had died, police recovered what at first seemed like a simple item, a well-worn Bible. But hidden within its pages was more than scripture. It was a diary of pain, a chronicle of fear, a coded testimony written in the margins of a holy book, the Bible as a confession booth. Between the underlined passages and inserted bookmarks, detectives found scribbled notes in Mary's handwriting, many expressing despair, frustration, and prayers for escape. Some pages were tear-stained. Others had messages like, "He says it's my fault. God, forgive me for what I think I have to do. If I leave, he'll take the girls." Most chilling was a folded letter lodged in Psalm 55, a passage about betrayal. "If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it, but it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend." In that letter, Mary wrote, "They'll call me crazy or a liar, but I can't take another night pretending it's all okay." It became clear that this wasn't just about murder. It was about years of abuse and internal collapse. The community's faith is tested. As news of the notes broke, Selmer was ripped in two. Some locals stood by Mary, saying they had seen subtle signs for years: her nervous glances, her submissiveness, her lack of voice in her own home. But others were furious. One church elder said, "That man led our prayers, baptized our children. Are we just supposed to believe he was a monster behind closed doors?" A former friend of Mary's added, "We all put pastors on pedestals. Maybe we were too blinded by the pulpit to see the pain in the pew." Questions arose. Did the church miss the signs? Did Matthew use religion to control Mary? Did her faith delay her escape? The secret life of Pastor Winkler? Digging deeper, investigators discovered Matthew Winkler had been under financial stress. There were unexplained loans taken out in Mary's name. Some accounts suggested Matthew had online habits, gambling and adult websites, that contradicted his wholesome image. While never definitively proven, they raised red flags. Even more damning, neighbors reported hearing arguments late at night, raised voices, crying children, then silence. The prosecution wanted to paint Mary as calculated, but the evidence was shifting public sentiment. A national debate. Victim or killer? By the time Mary Winkler appeared in court, she was no longer a mystery. She was a symbol. To some, she was a battered woman failed by church, family, and justice. To others, she was a murderer using victimhood as a defense. Her defense team leaned into the abuse narrative, highlighting the trauma, the religious pressure, the isolation, and Mary's fractured emotional state. They presented a picture of a woman who believed killing her husband was the only way out. But prosecutors countered with a haunting argument. If Mary wanted out, why not walk away? Why not call for help? Why pull the trigger while the children slept down the hall? The case wasn't just about Mary Winkler anymore. It was about how society handles domestic abuse, especially when the abuser wears a suit, carries a Bible, and leads a congregation. The courtroom had gone quiet. The final verdict had been read. Mary Winkler, once the soft-spoken preacher's wife, had been sentenced, not for first-degree murder, but for voluntary manslaughter. After serving 67 days in jail, followed by time in a mental health facility, she walked out a free woman. The world was watching, but what came next surprised everyone. A second act begins. Many assumed Mary would vanish from the public eye, living out her life in quiet shame. Instead, she returned to Tennessee and began slowly rebuilding her life. In an interview just months after her release, Mary appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, speaking with surprising composure about the years of abuse, the isolation, and the night everything unraveled. She didn't deny pulling the trigger, but she also didn't justify it. Her words were calm, but the pain behind them was still visible. "I loved him," she told Oprah. "I just wanted the yelling and the control to stop. I wanted my girls to feel safe." She gained sympathy from many viewers, particularly survivors of domestic abuse, who saw her as a symbol of what happens when victims are silenced for too long. The fight for her children. Even after her release, Mary's story wasn't over. Her 3 daughters, Brianna, Mary Alice, and Patricia, had been taken into the custody of Matthew's parents. The Winklers fought hard to keep full custody, arguing that Mary was unstable and dangerous. But Mary petitioned the court and was eventually granted supervised visitation, and later shared custody. Her relationship with her daughters reportedly remains close, though shrouded in privacy. For years, Mary avoided media attention. She found work in healthcare, volunteered at women's shelters, and focused on recovery. Emotionally, financially, and spiritually. The legacy of the Winkler case. What made this case so unforgettable wasn't just the shocking nature of the crime. It was how it forced America to re-examine its assumptions. Mary wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a hardened criminal. She was the woman sitting next to you in church, in the PTA meeting, in the carpool line. If someone like her could snap, what else could we be missing? Her case launched a national conversation about the invisibility of emotional and spiritual abuse. How religious communities sometimes protect appearances over people. The limits of the justice system in handling trauma and domestic violence. Some say the verdict was too lenient. Others believe it was a rare act of understanding by a system that usually punishes without context. Where is she now? As of recent public records, Mary Winkler lives quietly in Tennessee, reportedly working in the medical field and staying out of the spotlight. She has given only a few interviews over the years and has never remarried. Her daughters, now grown, have kept their lives private. Some speculate about how they view their mother's actions, but no public statements have been made. For them, the tragedy was both public spectacle and personal nightmare. Matthew Winkler's former church, 4th Street Church of Christ, continues to hold services, but the echoes of the past still linger in the pews. Final reflections. The Winkler case was not just about a crime. It was about a crack in the American facade. The dangerous silence behind smiles, sermons, and perfect families. It was a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles from the pulpit, and sometimes the person we think of as weak is the one silently planning an escape. In the end, Mary Winkler became a paradox. A victim who killed, a mother who fractured a family, and a woman whose Bible held more than just prayers. And though justice may have been served in the courtroom, the true sentence, grief, regret, healing, plays out far beyond the walls of any prison. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for more true crime story.